Welcome back to the Pure Motivation Podcast. Today, we're going deep on boundaries.
Ooh, boundaries.
They can be tricky, right?
They can be, yeah.
But we've got some really incredible YouTube videos to help us unpack all of this.
Oh, cool.
We've got Dr. Tracey Marks,
Love her.
the holistic psychologist Tim Fletcher, even Gabor Mate.
Wow, that's a great lineup.
It is. And their perspectives are really eye-opening.
So are we talking like, setting those hard limits, or is there more to it?
There's so much more to it, yeah. And we're going to explore like all those hidden signs that you might need stronger boundaries and how your childhood can actually impact your boundaries as an adult.
Yeah, I've heard that before, that childhood stuff.
Yeah, it comes up a lot, right?
Right.
Okay, so before we get too deep into all of that, let's start with just like, what are boundaries, really?
Yeah, good place to start.
The holistic psychologist, she puts it really simply.
Okay.
Boundaries are just the limits, right, that we set in different areas of our lives.
Oh,
So we're talking emotional, material, even our time and energy, mental, physical, all of that.
so like they protect us.
They do. They're like guidelines for our well-being
Mhm.
and help us show up authentically in our relationships.
I like that. Showing up authentically, yeah, yeah.
And then there's Jimmy on relationships.
Oh, yeah, I've seen them.
He's great. And he makes this point that a boundary is about honoring yourself, what you deserve,
That makes sense.
not about controlling other people.
Okay, so self-respect.
Self-respect, yeah, I like.
Okay, so how do we know if we need to, work on our boundaries? Are there signs?
There are, and Dr. Tracey Marks, she actually outlines 5 red flags in her video.
Okay, lay 'em on me.
Number 1, overcommitting or people-pleasing.
Oh, that's me. I'm a total people pleaser.
Right, so it's that feeling of, I have to say yes, even if you're totally overwhelmed.
Ugh, yes. The guilt is real.
And you end up doing it out of fear of, disappointing others or being seen as selfish, even if it means sacrificing your own well-being.
Yeah, I always feel like I have to say yes, be helpful, be there for everyone.
Dr. Marks, she talks about how this can come from our narrative identity.
Never heard of that.
It's basically those stories we tell ourselves about who we are and how we're supposed to behave.
Oh, interesting.
And sometimes those stories tell us that saying no is a bad thing, even if it's totally necessary for, our own health, our own happiness.
Okay, so challenging those stories.
Challenging those stories and remembering, as Dr. Mark says, that saying no can actually be self-care.
Okay, that makes sense. It's not rejecting others.
Exactly. It's about prioritizing yourself.
Okay, so what's another sign?
All right, so this one, taking on other people's emotions.
Ooh, feeling what they're feeling.
Yes, exactly. You're constantly worried about upsetting others, or you change your behavior just to keep them happy, even if it means sacrificing your own needs.
I know people like that. It's exhausting.
It is exhausting, and it can lead to, resentment.
Yeah, for sure.
So Dr. Mark says self-awareness is key here.
Okay, so recognizing when you're getting sucked in.
Exactly. You got to recognize when you're getting caught up in their emotional tornado.
Ooh, I like that. Emotional tornado.
Right. And then start to separate, like, what you feeling versus what they're feeling.
Okay, separate those feelings.
Because you are not responsible for their emotions, just like they're not responsible for yours.
Boundaries, boundaries, boundaries.
Exactly. And that takes practice.
For sure.
All right. Sign number 3, difficulty expressing your own needs and opinions.
Oh, I think a lot of people struggle with that.
Yeah, for sure. So it's like you go along with what others want just to avoid conflict, even if it means ignoring what you really need or silencing your own voice.
I can see how that would be a problem.
It is, and Dr. Mark says this is common for, people who avoid conflict, but she has a great tip.
Okay, what is it?
Start practicing, like voicing your opinions, but in safe spaces.
Oh, that's smart, like with close friends.
Exactly, or journaling, just get comfortable expressing yourself.
Makes sense.
Because then you can eventually get to a place where you can express yourself more freely in other situations.
Okay, so build up to it.
Build up to it, yes. It's
Yep.
like anything, it takes practice.
Okay, what's next?
Number 4, feeling guilty when you actually prioritize yourself.
Oh, the guilt. I know that feeling.
It's like we've been programmed to think that taking care of ourselves is selfish.
And sometimes it's even punished, right?
Yeah, it can be, especially if it comes from like childhood experiences or past relationships where it wasn't encouraged.
It's deep-rooted sometimes.
It is, but Dr. Marks, she wants us to challenge those thoughts, those guilt trips, and remember that taking care of yourself actually allows you to show up better for others.
Okay, yeah, you can't pour from an empty cup.
Exactly. You need to fill your own cup first.
Makes sense.
Okay, last one, number 5, oversharing personal information.
Ooh, Interesting.
Yeah, so it's about recognizing that not everyone deserves to hear, like, your deepest thoughts and feelings.
Yeah, some things are sacred.
Exactly. So you have to be careful about who you share with and when.
So, like boundaries around information.
Exactly. And Dr. Marks, she has this great suggestion. She says, make a checklist.
A checklist.
Yeah. So, like, what information are you comfortable sharing with whom and under what circumstances?
That's a good idea.
Right. So it can help you, avoid oversharing, especially if it's not appropriate or safe.
It's like a roadmap for healthy sharing.
I like that. A roadmap for healthy sharing.
So those are the 5 red flags.
5 red flags from Dr. Marks. But we've got even more to uncover about the psychology of boundaries.
Let's do it.
Let's dive in.
You know, it's funny, those 5 signs, they often point back to like this fear of rejection.
It's true. Yeah. Like whether it's, overcommitting, not saying what we need, or even oversharing. It's like we just want to be liked.
Exactly. We want to fit in.
We want to fit in.
And that fear can be even stronger if you've experienced trauma.
Yeah. That's where Tim Fletcher's work comes in.
Right. Complex trauma.
Yeah. He explains how like family stuff, family dynamics can really mess with how we understand boundaries.
Makes sense. Families can be complicated.
Well, for sure. And Fletcher, he explains that in some families, the rules aren't really about, healthy development. They're about control,
Control, yeah.
suppressing needs. And it's not about love. It's about power.
Wow. That's heavy.
It is heavy, and it can manifest in like so many different ways.
Like what?
Some families, a million rules, others, no rules.
Yeah, I've seen both.
Right. And the rules might be like totally random, or they're not enforced consistently.
Or they're used as punishment.
Exactly. So boundaries become about pleasing the person in charge or avoiding consequences, not about like honoring what you need or how you feel.
So then that carries into adulthood.
It does. And Fletcher says it can make it hard to set boundaries in relationships as adults.
Makes sense.
Like people who grew up in those enmeshed families where everyone's all up in everyone else's business.
Yeah, those families.
They might struggle with boundaries because they're afraid of losing themselves.
Or like being responsible for their partner's happiness.
Yes, exactly. They equate closeness with like being together all the time.
Yeah, no space.
No space, and they can't imagine having their own needs in the relationship.
Or they swing the other way and they isolate themselves completely.
Right, because they're terrified of repeating those unhealthy patterns.
Shuts it a defense mechanism.
It is, and this makes me think of what Gabor Mate says about attachment and authenticity.
Oh, yeah, he's fascinating.
He is. He explains that as kids, we prioritize attachment to our caregivers.
Because we need them to survive.
We do, even if it means hiding our true selves.
So you can get their love and approval.
Exactly. We need that to feel safe.
But then as adults, Mate says we can choose differently. We can put authenticity first.
Yeah, we can learn to express our true selves, even if it means risking some of those attachments.
That's where boundaries come in.
They do. It's about creating that space for connection and authenticity.
So we can honor our needs and build healthy relationships.
And this brings us back to what Tim Fletcher says about boundaries being an act of kindness.
That always sounds weird to me.
I know, it does sound counterintuitive.
But it makes sense when you really think about it.
It does, because when you set boundaries, you're preventing resentment.
You're showing up authentically.
And you're actually giving others the opportunity to take responsibility for their own actions.
It's like you can't pour from an empty cup.
Right. You have to fill your own cup first.
If you're always giving, you'll burn out.
Exactly. And then you're no good to anyone.
This is something we talk about a lot on the Pure Motivation podcast.
We do. And if you're interested in learning more about self-care and boundaries, you can visit our website.
It's puremotivationpodcast.com.
We have tons of free resources there.
Check it out.
But getting back to those acts of kindness, I thought Fletcher's point about Jesus' teachings was really interesting.
Oh, yeah. How boundaries connect to that.
Yeah, he pointed out that Jesus wasn't afraid to call out bad behavior.
Even from people he loved.
Even from people he loved. It's about confronting those actions, setting limits, and encouraging growth.
So it's not about being passive or avoiding conflict.
It's not. It's about addressing the issues head on, but with compassion.
Okay, so we've talked about the signs you need stronger boundaries, complex trauma, and how boundaries are actually kind.
We have, but how do we actually go about setting those boundaries?
Especially if it feels scary or uncomfortable.
Right. It can be tough.
Dr. Tracey Marks, she has some practical tips.
Oh, good. Lay them on us.
She says it's a process, not about being perfect.
I like that. It takes the pressure off.
It does. It's like learning any new skill.
Takes time, takes practice.
Exactly. And her first suggestion is to identify your needs, your wants, and your values.
That's your why for setting the boundary,
It is. You have to know what matters to you.
what you will and won't tolerate.
Exactly. And then she says, start small.
Small steps.
Say no to that extra thing at work,
Or take some time for yourself.
even just 15 minutes.
Those little things can make a big difference.
They do. It shows you're worth it.
And the more you practice those small boundaries, the easier the bigger ones become.
She also suggests preparing scripts.
Scripts?
Yeah, like for common situations so you know what to say.
That's a good idea. Like, what would those sound like?
Okay, so let's say your friend asks you to help them move for the third weekend in a row.
Oh, I've been there.
And you're just exhausted.
Yeah.
You could say, hey, I know you're stressed about moving and I want to support you, but I'm not available this weekend. I need some time to recharge.
So much better than just saying yes and feeling resentful later.
Right. And if they push back, you hold firm.
Like, what would you say?
You could say, I understand you're disappointed, but I've already made other plans. I'm happy to help another time.
So clear, direct, respectful.
To both of you.
What about when people really push back, though?
Oh, it's going to have to.
It's going to happen, especially with people who are used to us not having any boundaries.
It's important to remember that boundaries are for you.
Not about controlling others.
It's about taking care of yourself.
But doesn't that sound selfish?
It's not selfish to prioritize your well-being.
I guess not.
When you take care of yourself, you can actually take better care of others.
Like that empty cup analogy.
Exactly.
I know I'm not my best when I'm burnt out.
Right. And Gabor Mate, he talks about how we can choose healthy relationships as adults.
Where we can be connected and authentic.
It's a balance.
That balance comes from setting healthy boundaries.
When you communicate your needs clearly and consistently, you create space for genuine connection.
Okay, so we've talked about Dr. Marks's advice on setting boundaries.
Yeah.
But what do the other experts have to say about this?
Right. Practical tips for setting those boundaries.
What else did you find?
The holistic psychologist, she adds a couple of things.
Okay.
She says, be clear and direct when you're communicating your boundaries.
Makes sense, but I feel like a lot of people, they kind of hint around.
They do. They hope people will just, get it.
It's like they want them to be mind readers.
Exactly, but that doesn't work, and then everyone's disappointed.
So be upfront.
Be upfront, yeah, and
Yeah.
then be consistent.
With enforcing them,
Yeah, it's not enough to just say it once.
you got to follow through.
You do. You got to show people you're serious about taking care of yourself.
It teaches them how to treat you,
Exactly. You draw that line in the sand and you hold firm.
even when it's hard.
Even when it's hard, that consistency, it builds respect and trust.
In Tim Fletcher, he talks about how setting boundaries, especially with family, can sometimes cause problems
Yeah, they might resist.
because it changes the dynamic.
It does. If they're used to a certain way of things, shifting that power, it can feel threatening.
So what do you do when people push back?
Fletcher says, start small.
Okay,
Gradually increase your assertiveness.
so you don't have to go from 0 to 100 overnight.
Nope, baby steps.
Find what feels manageable.
It's like building that self-respect muscle.
One boundary at a time.
One boundary at a time, and it's okay to ask for help.
Oh yeah, support is important.
It is. A therapist, a friend, even online communities.
They can give you guidance, encouragement, all of that.
You don't have to do it alone.
And speaking of support, we have tons of resources on our website.
We do.
It's puremotivationpodcast.com, right?
That's it.
We have articles, worksheets, guided meditations, all about boundaries and self-care.
All about building healthier, happier relationships.
It's all connected.
It is, and it comes back to that idea of, boundaries being self-love.
Recognizing your worth.
That your needs matter, that you have the right to protect yourself.
And that self-respect, it goes outward.
It creates a better environment for everyone.
It's not selfish, it's a gift.
To yourself and to the people in your life.
Well said. And I want to leave our listeners with one last thought from Gabor Mate.
Okay.
He asks, what would you rather have in your life? Other people liking you or being true to yourself?
That's deep.
It is. It makes you think about all those compromises we make to please people.
Are they really serving us?
Or are they keeping us stuck?
True happiness comes from living authentically.
Aligning with our values, our needs.
Our true selves.
I love it. I think that's a perfect place to end.
It is.
So to all our listeners, take some time to think about your own boundaries.
Where do you need stronger limits?
What can you do today to honor your needs and values?
It might feel uncomfortable at first.
But remember, setting boundaries is a sign of self-respect.
Self-love.
That's what true motivation is all about.
It is. It's a journey, not a destination.
Be patient with yourself.
Celebrate the small
You're
wins.
on the right track.
And if you want to explore this more, we have all those resources on our website.
PureMotivationPodcast.com.
We'd love to connect with you there.
Thanks for joining us today for this deep dive into boundary.
It's been great.
Setting those healthy limits is an act of self-love.
You deserve it.
Thanks for listening to the Pure Motivation Podcast.